Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, July 15th, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington Free Beacon editor Eliana Johnson. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, John.
Okay, couple things. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m., I believe, the president will be delivering a nationally televised address. And there seems to be two lines of thought about this address. People in Georgia told somebody in Washington, who is a reporter that I've never heard of, that the address is going to be about how the Georgia election was stolen, foreign interference into our election process in 2020, which, by the way, we already knew about 2016 and 2020 and the Russians and others fiddling around in our elections, and that he is going to somehow declare the senatorial, the senators, Georgia senators Ossoff and Warnock, illegitimate. But the truth is we only have one source, as far as I can tell, for this account of what the speech is going to be tomorrow night. And then the other question is, what else might the speech be about? It would be obvious that Trump, if he's going to deliver a national address, would do so to talk about the war and the change in policy and strategy that he has inaugurated this week in the war, which has various aspects that are discontinuous from where we were over the ceasefire period, and that he would therefore want to give Americans an update on what is going on. This is I'm taking out of nowhere here. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a choice. It's going to be about Iran, or it's going to be about Georgia. Okay, each you get to pick one or the other. Eliana? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Let's stipulate that we don't know what the president's going to talk about in any given speech, but if his campaign rallies give us any indication, he's going to talk about whatever he wants to talk about, and it's probably going to cover lots and lots and lots of things. I think he will address both the war in Iran, which has resumed. The MOU is a thing of the past, and our attempts to prevent them from exerting control over the strait. And I also think he's going to make the case for this Save America Act that focuses on election integrity, that he very much wants Congress to pass, but for which there are not enough Republican votes to pass the Congress. And there's a chance he does veer off the White House advisors deny to talk about how the election was stolen from him. The two Georgia senators, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, are illegitimate. And that may not be on the script, but he may very well do it. So I think the speech is likely to encompass quite a lot of different things.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that he might focus on Georgia, but he's been saying that there was some sort of case of some sort of proof of foreign election interference. And I'm wondering if he's going to tie Iran into Georgia. And that's why it would be about both, because he has made noises about this before. And this morning he's saying some sort of big foreign interference in American elections. So I don't know. It's funny because it might not be about Georgia at all. That might have just been assumed. It's possible. But because the truth is that the interference in the Georgia election that got Democrats elected was Donald Trump. And so, right. One finger pointing out, three fingers pointing back. But I think that, I think it might be something, if it's election interference, and I think it might tie both together. Yeah.
Okay, but first of all, so this is supposed to be some kind of Oval Office or formal presidential address. He wants the networks to cover it, so he is going to have to tell them that it's 20 minutes long or something like that. If he can't do a weave because they'll cut him off in the middle of the speech. So it will have to be some kind of he will have to pick and choose. I mean, he can have 2 topics or 3 topics, but it will have to be more focused and contained than a rally speech. There is this one other possibility, which is that given the extraction of Maduro and the replacement of Maduro by Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela, and the theory, the governing theory of I think the Smartmatic argument, I can't remember if it's the Dominion argument or the Smartmatic argument, is that a lot of the trouble supposedly was coming from Venezuela, that they have new information from Venezuela about what Venezuela might have been doing. Now, as Stephen Richer, who is the Secretary of State he was the Mariposa County Elections Commissioner, and the guy who, a rock-ribbed Republican who said that the results in Arizona were legitimate and that this whole thing about how they weren't legitimate was a lie and all of that.
Yeah, Stephen's a friend, and he was the title there. It's essentially that, but he was the recorder.
The recorder in Mariposa County. And of course, our friend, Chris Stirewalt ended up being a sacrificial lamb at Fox for having noted that Trump had that Trump had lost Arizona, largely because the Mariposa County results were not going the way he needed them to go. So this is a person, Chris is a dear friend of mine, and Eliana did a podcast with him for 2 years. And, I trust Stephen Richer, and I don't like this whole argument. But as Stephen Richer points out, Georgia uses paper ballots. So machines can't, it's not a machine. The machines can't miscount. It's on paper, and they did 2 recounts on paper. So this whole argument that Georgia was stolen, when, by the way, Trump lost by, remember the notorious number, right? 11,388, whatever it was he said on the phone call, saying, I just wanted you to find those votes for me. Ossoff and Warnock won by way more than that. Both in the
they won because of Trump. They won because of his behavior. I mean, exactly. It's crazy. Separately, this is a different but related point. We're reading in these news accounts that the president wants to use these Oval Office primetime addresses more. And I think that's a risky strategy for a couple of reasons. One, when the president addresses the country in a primetime televised address, one, he relies on the news media to push off other programming and take it live. And I think the country expects to hear something important. And if they don't, they're going to start to tune those things out, not to listen, and the networks won't take it. And the second reason is I think the president just naturally performs better in front of a crowd, and he's better suited to traveling, being on the stump, doing rallies. And then because of that, the networks are actually more likely to take those things. And I think it's just something for, the White House to keep in mind, as the president seems to, we'll see, want to use this format more.
I mean, I by the way, I agree with your assessment entirely. Remember how remember the fatigue that set in over his COVID addresses, although there were crowds there for that, but in any event, I would think that he would want to try to get a hold of the Iran narrative at this point. That would be what a more orthodox, predictable president would be using this address for. I mean, huge zigs and zags in the policy, even though he's been talking about it. He was talking to Fox News, and he's been talking about it extemporaneously. I kind of think he wants to sort of reinforce the idea that he does have a plan here, and that he's following it.
I'd hope that was the case, but you're saying you would think, and we're saying he should, and
yeah, right.
and if he wants if he wants these addresses to count, he will he will say something important that will be that will have some effect on American public opinion. And there are real reasons for Trump to work to change American public opinion if he were able to. Pew Research poll shows that leaners, that is to say, came out yesterday, that leaners, that is not people who are not officially part of either party, but say they lean toward the Democrats or they lean toward the Republicans, are now leaning, according to Pew, 12 points in the Democratic direction, which is a 16-point shift from 2024, when leaners were 4 points in aggregate leaning toward the Republicans. So these are theoretically people who have not made up their mind. They're not party aligned and all of that. And good economic news, good war news, different feelings about the country, all of that could potentially have a real effect. Those are people that he should be speaking to. He does not need to speak to his base. He does not need to attack the Democrats. He needs to talk to them just as a matter of political hygiene to see if there is give in the electorate that will help Republicans and bring his numbers up and all of that. But he really doesn't have a demonstrated talent for doing what I just described. I mean, can we think of a time when he was able to say, I want to come to you with a message of reassurance and optimism about where things are going, both in the war and in the economy and all of that, so that you can have the confidence necessary to say, I'm not so terrible, or that the Republican who is running in your district is somebody that you should vote for. I can't think of a time when he did it. And, he's only got 2.5 more years in office. So I just don't know why he's doing a nationally televised address. And if he is doing it for the reasons of wanting to relitigate the 2020 election, that is essentially a kind of surrender, right? That's like, you know what? What's going to happen in November doesn't matter to me. What's going to happen over the next 2 years doesn't matter to me. I want to go back in time and win the presidency in 2020, and that's more important to me than doing what I just said. And we know,
or as an excuse also, right? I mean, you can't trust these elections, so what happens in November is China's fault.
Well, that would be right. Well, if you're an anti-Trump paranoid, you would look at this and say he's laying the groundwork for saying that the results in 2026 are illegitimate, and that somehow the election in 2026 was also stolen, and God only knows what that would mean. Or if he's laying the predicate for saying the election in 2028 is stolen, although he can't run again in 2028. Now, to be fair to him, in 2014, when Barack Obama was slaughtered, when the Democrats were slaughtered in the 2014 midterms, Republicans winning 9 Senate seats, Obama came out the next day. In 2010, Obama came out after the 63 seats won by Republicans and said, that was a shellacking. The American people handed me my hat. After 2014, he did not say that. He said, if you look at the numbers, only 1/3 of Americans voted, and I don't consider that a mandate for anybody else. And now I'm going to behave really unconstitutionally for the next 2 years of my presidency and deem all these things. And I have a pen and a phone, and I'm going to make DACA happen. I'm going to make all of that stuff happen because I don't accept the results of this election. So if Trump is laying the groundwork for that, once again, he will be in good company because he will be following a pattern set by Obama, just like his executive order mania was basically inaugurated by Obama. And even though he hates Obama, like Obama is like his godhead. Obama is the person whose presidency he is most emulating, or the presidency of Obama's last 2 years. So What would we like him to say? How about that? Hey, what would you want him to say?
I mean, it's fantasy land, but
No, go ahead.
something about finishing the job in Iran without veering into they're great people. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. They want to make a deal. They have to make a deal. I don't want any of those prognostications and going down those tributaries. Just a straightforward, we're going to topple the regime, period.
Seth, what
And,
would you
and
like?
hang in there, bear the economic burden, bear the energy burden. It's going to be great on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I broadly agree with that as the fantasy, but I would like some kind of specific. That if we're dealing in like what we really want him to say, I would love to hear something that tells me that he envisions this war ending with an American victory. So not just the statement that he envisions the war ending in an American victory, but like something that shows that he gets what's going on.
Eliana, do you have any?
Yeah, I think making a clear case for what we're doing and why it's necessary, and what the consequences of it might be for the American people, which the president has done intermittently, particularly at the outset of this, but he didn't do it in the run-up. But once things started, he did it, and he used a primetime address to do it at one point. But I think people need to hear things several times to actually absorb them, and it would be useful to reinforce why we struck a ceasefire, why we did this MOU, and why we are where we are now. Why we've gone back and forth on these things.
I mean, look, he has a very easy, speaking as a former presidential speechwriter, which I was, what happened over the last 3 months is a very good predicate to a powerful speech. In other words, he can say, we bombed the hell out of them, and then we took a pause because we would prefer to end what is going on here diplomatically. And we took a pause in order to make sure that international shipping remained open, and because we wanted to see what we could get at the table as a result of what we had done militarily. And they, from day one, broke this. They promised and they signed and they broke every promise that they made. And in this behavior, we now see why, and then sort of following Abe's point, they can never be trusted. They can never be trusted not to build a nuclear weapon, and they can never be trusted not to use a nuclear weapon. We gave them a chance. We were there with the chance, and what they wanted to do was humiliate the United States, claim victory against the United States, and we cannot allow that to happen, and we cannot allow them to stand. It is a very easily structured, let's just talk about what happened since February 28th. Here we are, it's July, it'll be July 16th. This is what's happened, and Iran has proved what it is. It is hell-bent on causing hell, and it is unmovable, even given the kind of pounding that we gave it, and the political problems that were caused by the decapitation strikes and all of that. And so I'm here today to say we're going to finish the job because we have no choice. They cannot be reasoned with. So it's, it writes itself. I don't think he's going to do it. And I'm very sad to think that he's not going to do it. In part because it's the only really important thing that's going on now. The Save America Act is not important. Daylight savings time is not important. We're the country's national honor and its power and its future as a projector of power or a defender of the international order or whatever is on the line here, and all the other stuff is Narishkeit. It's all just, whatever goes on that is of interest, to the, he could also talk about how there's a disgusting, cyclospora breakout, and he's going to do something about that. I mean, you could talk about anything. None of that matters at the presidential level. This is the only thing that really counts. And, so it will be a very deeply missed opportunity if he doesn't use the opportunity to do what we're all suggesting. So, having talked about him, it's now time to talk about our least favorite senatorial candidate, and the candidate whose potential victory in the Democratic Party on August 4th will herald a really dark new time in American politics, and he may be stoppable. And that is, of course, Abdul El-Sayed of Michigan, and of course, the Washington Free Beacon, the source of all things good and true on the subject of Abdul El-Sayed, has more fun stuff about Abdul El-Sayed, and then we have some other stuff that's happened this morning.
I also think we should talk about I won't be on tomorrow, but talk about it with Matt if you want. This data center moratorium that Kathy Hochul has.
Oh, we will. I was going to get to that later.
Yeah.
No, we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Abdul, John, you asked the other day, and I said I didn't think so, whether Graham Plattner's his unmasking, his whatever you want to call it in Maine.
His humiliated retreat.
Humiliation.
You might say his struggle.
his unmasking the embarrassment of the consultants around him who did not thoroughly vet him before they foisted him on the voters of Maine and the Maine Democratic Party would have ripple effects out to Michigan. And I'm still not sure, but I'm now leaning in that direction. And we've talked about Haley Stevens's poor political skills, but I now actually think she's got some momentum, and she's surging. There's a poll from Fox. Is it from Fox News? I'm not sure who has the poll.
News. It's Detroit News.
Excuse me. Yes, out this morning has her up 7 points, 48-41 over El-Sayed, and I think in the same way that Plattner was unmasked as a phony man of the people, working class guy who in fact had a grandfather who was a world famous architect, designed windows on the world, and a attorney father, Dartmouth educated father, and who himself attended Hotchkiss and was a ne'er-do-well who was booted out and then graduated from a different private school and had nothing to do with the working class. He was just a little bleep, a rich little bleep of the type that we all know, and a screw up, mentally unwell screw up. I think we're starting to see now that Abdul El-Sayed is a similar phony, presenting himself as a man of the working class. The story in the Free Beacon this morning is about Abdul El-Sayed's luxury watch collection. And we had a story a couple days ago about how his psychiatrist wife doesn't accept any insurance in her practice, which is typical for, any psychiatrist worth their salt. Not that she is a good psychiatrist, but, many psychiatrists don't accept insurance. Force you, if you do have insurance, to submit claims on your own. But he's out there campaigning for the abolition of private insurance, for Medicare for all. And he is being exposed as the same sort of hypocrite that Plattner was. The guy owns a collection of luxury watches worth at least $20,000. Okay, I do not own watches worth anywhere near that much money. And he's gone out there talking about what a fan of watches he was. He got a shout out from a watch podcast about his $4,000 watch, how amazing it was. And the guy likes nice things. His tax returns are out this morning and they omit a lot, okay? He put out 2 pages, but they do show that he and his wife in 2025 brought in $675,000 last year. Well, he is putting out tweets saying, we can't afford, we referring to the people of Michigan, can't afford groceries and gas, and putting himself in, lumping himself in with people who are genuinely poor. And he has talked about how angry and upset it made him to see ads for Rolex watches on the side of the freeway in Michigan, and the psychological damage it does to people to see advertisements for things they cannot afford, and lamenting how it hurts people in Michigan to see ads for Rolex watches while he is sporting watches that cost just as much as those. $4,000, $5,000, $2,000, $1,950. The guy's got dozens of luxury watches. So I do think the through line between Plattner and El-Sayed is the phoniness, the absolute phoniness, and the attempt to pull the wool over the eyes of voters and pretend they are men of the people when they are rich cranks.
Okay, so I just want to make my point that I'm not a phony, and because I just want to show you, if you're watching
John,
us on
we
YouTube,
would do a lot better if we
Hold
could
on.
be more phony.
No, on YouTube, I'm just saying, this is my watch. It is a Timex Indiglo. Okay, $40. Buy it off Amazon. Why do I have a Timex Indiglo? I'm blind as a bat. It's 3:00 in the morning, and I wake up and I need to see what time it is, and I can press this little button. You'll see it goes green like that. Way more expensive watches don't have this feature, as far as I can tell, nor do I need a way more expensive watch. So I can say that you can get along perfectly well with a Timex Indiglo, $40, and it's handsome, by the way. It's a perfectly handsome old-fashioned watch.
I gotta up you.
Yeah.
By which I mean down you. $35 on Amazon. Something called Omega. MEGA. No.
It's
Omega.
Omega because it looks like an old Omega. My grandfather had that watch, but I think he got that as like a retirement present or something. But that's the Mega. Excellent. But as I say, I have a specific reason to have the Indiglo, which is my extreme nearsightedness and my inability to see the clock across the room without my glasses on. But I can shove this thing right up to my eyeballs and press the button and see what time it is. So I don't need a senator with a really expensive watches, and nor does Michigan. The interesting question is that our problem with El-Sayed is not that he has luxury watches or that he's a hypocrite. Our problem with him is that he is a terrorist-loving family member of a Hamas affiliated fundraiser who hates Israel, doesn't condemn the murder of Jews in his own state, and has evil and barbaric views. I'm perfectly happy that other aspects of his problematic character are reflected in other behaviors that then cast some light on how he's having these views may also play some role in making you really not the best guy. I would love to believe that to be the case. Obviously, I know many people that I agree with who are like not good people. And so I'm unwilling to assume that people that I don't agree with are bad people. But when you like love Hamas and you won't condemn the murder of Jews, that gets to your character, and it might mean that you're going to be a complete hypocrite who acts like you're a suffering working man when you're actually a wealthy guy who might, for all we know, be living off the proceeds of his non-Medicare taking wife. But which is interesting, by the way, because one of the policies that he suddenly adopted in the debate with Haley Stevens last week was that he believes that nobody should pay a Medicare premium. right? That no old person should pay a Medicare premium. This is a fascinating bit of data because I just turned 65 and discovered, and we have health insurance here, but you kind of have to take Medicare, and so I didn't know that you had to pay a Medicare premium, but everybody does have to pay a Medicare premium, and it feels a little unfair. But I'm not a socialist, so I don't believe, so I think I think Medicare is a bad system, and I don't believe in universal entitlements because I think they're going to bankrupt the country. But he is now favoring one population over another. Why? Because he needs votes from older people, and so he's doing a classic vote for me, and I'll buy you off with this policy that I can never enact anyway because I'm only one senator out of 100. But it was the first time, I think, that moment in the debate that you saw what you saw, like his a little bit of desperation, like that he was going to need something to juice him beyond his radical chic that seemed to have excited base Democratic voters and led to his surge in the first 6 months of this year.
John, I share your deeper concern about his more problematic and toxic issue, which is his, as you say, enthusiasm for terrorists and all of that. I think the sad reality might be that his being a sort of indulgent materialist that may be more salient among certain voters than the fact that he sides with America's enemies.
Well, look, obviously, if he were like a saint, but he had these terrible views on terrorism, that would present a problem running against him. If he were like a wonderful person who did nothing but minister to the poor and go around and wash the feet of the poor, whatever, being except that he had these terrible opinions about Hamas, but even that, given his welter of other behaviors, could be defended against. So fortunately, he's not that, right? He's not. I don't know what he has to recommend him as a human being. He was also like a classic public health official in the COVID era with bad ideas and imposing totalitarian restrictions and doing all that stuff that public health officials were doing during the COVID era. So, already there, he's, unattractive to me. But I do think that this poll that has Haley Stevens up 7 is very striking because this is, again, one of the first times in this surge of the DSA and radical candidates where there is a real race inside the Democratic Party. The only other one we had was Lander versus Goldman. No, there was a race between Daria Eliza Chevalier and Adriano Espaillat that she won by.
Lander also left
was
the
that
DSA.
Wait, yeah. What? Right.
Lander left the DSA, so by the
right.
time that race happened, it wasn't a DSA, technically
Right.
a DSA.
Right. But I'm saying what we have here is in an electorate in a state with 11 million people, statewide race, one radical candidate and one non-radical candidate inside the Democratic coalition, that it would be very salubrious for the country, in my view, if the radical was handed his hat in the primary, because the results of his success are going to be very dangerous, even if he loses in November to Mike Rogers, even if he won and lost in November, which is, this is the way to go in the Democratic Party. This will be an answer in a purple state, in a swing state. You can't be this crazy and disgusting and win even among Democrats. And so maybe going into 2027, when Democrats are going to have to start thinking about who's going to represent them nationally in 2028. There will be a reality check, which is what they need. Plattner isn't a reality check because he was ousted not on the basis of his views, but because of his repulsive personal behavior. Although I think having a Nazi tattoo is somehow reflective of an Jew-hating anti-Semite, and that is an important element of the Plattner matter. It's not just the
bit of a red flag.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, this will be a good thing for the country if Haley Stevens wins, because it won't ensure, but it will mean that the Democratic Party is going to have to look long and hard at what it's going to embrace if it wants to coalesce behind somebody who can win in 2028 and who will not be repulsive to independents and others whom they would need to win in 2028.
Right. And the interesting thing is that this is happening in Michigan, where Alyssa Slotkin once upon a time was she quite famously criticized.
She's the senator.
She's the senator now.
Right.
She was in the House. And when she was in the House, she criticized AOC and the defund the police bandwagon. And reportedly at, some, behind the scenes, she was saying things like, your district, AOC, is not America. Like, you can get away with this stuff. It kills us in Michigan. It absolutely kills us in Michigan. Slotkin now has surrendered to the idea that the moment has passed to differentiate Democrats in Michigan from Democrats in the Bronx and elsewhere. So the question is it just, does she have political instincts that tell her that the party, that she's now on their bandwagon rather than the reverse? Or, is it just that she's given up fighting it? And that's the real question here: is the cause lost, right? Or do they just not have somebody who is fighting it? Because on the national scene, and we've talked about this too, on the national scene, nobody wants Chuck Schumer involved in their Democratic primary, right? Nobody wants him there. Hakeem Jeffries is not exactly standing athwart history in the Democratic Party, shouting stop. So it might just be the case that it's not all, the cause is not actually lost. In that case, it'll come down to the voters of Michigan, but there isn't anybody. Slotkin as the senator, Chuck Schumer as the Senate floor leader. There isn't anybody in the party who is taking the reins and saying, no, the cause is not lost. And that has a huge effect, not just on the momentum, but also on the shock value. Because if Stevens wins, it won't be because the establishment struck back. It won't be revenge of the empire, whatever. The empire strikes back. It won't be because the establishment, although Abdul El-Sayed and all his fans will say so, and they will point to this for years to come as being squashed by the establishment and blah, blah, blah. But it simply won't be true. If she wins, it won't be because the establishment did enough to help her win. And so that is going to be the more interesting thing, is if that happens, does the establishment say, oh, look at the power we didn't realize we have? Maybe we should exercise that power more. So it may have the reverse effect. It's not the establishment now doing anything, and that's a real problem. If they get lucky and win anyway, the establishment that is, then we can see how they react to that.
Here's what I wonder. I mean, there was like 10 minutes after the 2024 election when Kamala wouldn't disavow her, transgender surgeries for prisoners and illegal immigrants views, and her, tried to straddle both lanes on Israel and the war in Gaza and so on and so forth. But it was clear she was too far to the left and didn't have the political skills to take on Trump, when Democrats said, we went way too far to the left here, culturally. Spanberger was saying that. Slotkin was saying that. Several other, Seth Moulton was saying that. So that may be their takeaway in the Michigan primary if Slotkin wins for 10 minutes, but will it go on for longer than 10 minutes? I don't see that happening in the Democratic leadership. And I agree with you. I mean, there's a debate among Republicans about whether they should be boosting El-Sayed because he'd be easier to run against in the general. I don't think so. It is simply too risky in such a bad year for Republicans to have this guy come that close to a Senate seat. I think all people of good conscience should be hoping that Haley Stevens wins this primary.
Right,
I understand the other view. He
Yeah.
obviously would be the weaker candidate in the general election, but I am not rooting for him to win this primary.
Yeah, I always bring up for people. Jim Messina said during the 2016, I think it was 2015 at the time. I pray to God every night that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. That's what Jim Messina, who was one of the architects of Obama's successful presidential campaigns, said. This is the Messina rule, as I call it. This is, point blank. He kept saying, if there's a God in heaven, and all, he said out loud what people were saying behind the scenes. A lot of people agreed with that. A lot of people said, boy, it'd be great to run against Donald Trump, but didn't actually say it. So that's the Messina lesson. You don't go around thanking God for your opponent until you have beaten your opponent.
I think there's another important element here. Yesterday, El-Sayed tweeted out, hey, look at all this money that is being raised by this super PAC against me. It's AIPAC money. Now, remember, AIPAC is not a super PAC. AIPAC is not a lobby. I mean, AIPAC is not a lobby. It's whatever. AIPAC, their money is being raised independently to go at El-Sayed, in Michigan. And he's saying AIPAC is targeting me. And you know what? Good. You know what? Jews need to fight back. It will be very helpful to the idea that it is dangerous to run the campaigns, anti-Semitic campaigns, if this foremost anti-Semitic campaign that is being run maybe almost in the history of the United States is turned backward, and that the Jewish lobby, even though it's not a Jewish lobby, can claim some role in the result. Because one of the ways that power works is that you deter. And the deterrence here would be El-Sayed climbed up the ladder, used the DSA, ran as a Hamas lover effectively, and then this small but passionate group of people marshaled what resources they had to turn him back and turn him away. And don't think that won't happen to you, generic Democrat or DSA Democrat, if you're thinking of running in 2028. Such people already got Cory Bush knocked out of the primary in Missouri in 2024. Jamal Bowman knocked out of the primary in 2024 in New York. If El-Sayed can get taken down and Jews can claim some role in having done this, as there is this self-consciously Muslimist, Islamist faction that is trying to play a major role in American politics, I think the Jewish role in taking that down is very important, and it not be secret and quiet and hidden and behind the scenes and all of that.
Meanwhile, his father-in-law is pouring $200,000 that we know of. There's another financial disclosure yet to come into a super PAC supporting him. Is anyone in the news media who he will respond to going to go to him and ask him, hey, are you going to ask your father-in-law to stand down because you want money out of politics? Has anyone in the mainstream written a negative story about this guy? Anybody?
No, but you know what? If there are two more polls like this, that's when the effort to correct the record or to muddy the history here will start. You know this, like this is a classic element of this. When somebody looks like they're a winner and their views align with your views in the mainstream media, you don't touch, right? You do the Lindsay Feifeld thing. You do a story, but you bury it 30 paragraphs down in order to make sure that you get some credit for having covered something, but you're actually cleaning. You're sort of cleaning up for Plattner's mess, and then that story had to be accentuated by the open emergence of the second victim, named victim of Plattner's sexual assaults. But if El-Sayed starts looking like he may lose, I think you will see some mainstream media coverage of some of this, so that when we want to go and start screaming at them and saying, you covered for this guy and aren't you ashamed of yourself, he lost or whatever, they'll say, no, we didn't. See, here's our story. On August 1st, we published a story that said El-Sayed's father-in-law has ties to terrorist organizations. One story, not like a drumbeat, not like so where you set 5 reporters on it and have them reporting every day, but one story here, one story in AP, a story in Politico, a story in the New York Times. But Stevens is going to have to look more formidable for them to decide that they need to cover their tracks if El-Sayed starts looking like a loser. That would be
If the mainstream media publishes a story about his father-in-law between now and August 4th, I will eat my hat.
You don't have to eat your hat. I'm not going to. One of the great short films ever made is called Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. It's by a guy named Les Blank, and Les Blank said he was going to make a documentary about Werner Herzog, who making the movie Fitzcarraldo. And Werner Herzog said to Les Blank, if you ever finish that documentary, I will eat my shoe. And Les Blank did. And then he sat and he filmed Werner Herzog eating his shoe. And it's an 8-minute, you could watch it on YouTube. It's hilarious. He did, in fact, cook and eat his shoe. And I don't want to do that to you, Eliana. So I don't want you saying you'll eat your shoe or eat your hat or something like that, because, it's okay.
But also the type of story the reason that you might lose a bet like that is because the Times is somewhat likely to do a story about the Free Beacon doing a story on his father-in-law. That when things get, something goes viral, the Times will often do a story on the Republicans pounce type of story. We do see that from time to time. So I definitely don't want you having to eat your hat or your shoe or anything else because the Times did a story because you did a story, because that would be the ultimate irony. But that is the pattern in the more general sense, is that you may well see, right-wing media portrays Abdul El-Sayed's father-in-law as terrorist or whatever, and then talk to people about that. And that might be the way you get the discussion of it. And that is very similar to what we've just been talking about with the Graham Plattner stories in the New York Times, to cover it in a way that presents you with the conclusion you should draw at the top, and not read what the information is that people are actually discussing about the person.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on to the data center issue that Eliana brought up, because it's worth spending 5 minutes on. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, running for re-election this year, desperately trying. Although nobody thinks that her rival, though he's actually a really good guy, Bruce Blakeman, is going to prevail here. But nonetheless, she is doing whatever she can to make good with all Democratic constituencies. And she announced yesterday or the day before yesterday that there would be a moratorium in New York State on the construction of all data centers for at least a year. The data centers that are being built all over the country in order to generate the electricity that AI servers need because they eat up an enormous amount of energy, and so they need new sources of energy generation in order not to put too much pressure on the American energy grid, and also to keep prices down. Now, the weird part is that she says in part, we're doing this in order to keep prices down, which is absurd, because if you have less energy and more of it there's competition for the energy needed for AI, prices are going to go up. But this is a very interesting Luddite moment, even though I speak as somebody who was terrified of AI and, would wish that it had never happened somehow. Obviously, this is the wave of the future, and New York State is making a move that other states are probably going to follow, which is to refuse to allow the placement of AI businesses in their state, because they won't be able to produce the energy they need to do the work. So the states that say okay are going to have a gold rush, and states like New York that are in desperate need of saving themselves from their own economic backwater. They were really, really, really successful in the late 19th century. They've been in decline ever since. Are going to shut the door to this future industry.
Well, I mean, I think, one problem is that the biggest problem is that the moratoriums become permanent. That's the trap that seems to be being laid for that, because I'm open to the idea that a state having trouble managing its electric grid, its power grid, maybe needs to figure out how to do that, and therefore maybe there's a limit on it, maybe whatever. I'm open to the idea that we can discuss that, an industry that is looking to use, a third of a state's power grid, when all is said and done, that there's maybe a discussion to be had there. But what I'm more nervous about is that this is like when someone gets suspended from a network to get the heat off them, and then they never return to the network or something like that. That this is a moratorium that turns into a soft ban, and I think the other part of this is that you watch the way that this is being spoken about, the terminology that it's being couched in. The data centers have become a clear establishment versus the people issue. It has been completely eaten up by the populist wave. And so now you have what you have with other litmus test issues, where it's like, well, if you're on the side of big business and bad people, you want data centers. If you're on the side of the people, you don't want data centers. And that oversimplification, because again, if you build a data center, you will be creating jobs for some of those people. Like it's not, it is complicated, and it's definitely not the really truly populist working class move to ban jobs. But it is falling into that litmus test area where you can just throw out a term and say data center, it codes establishment. And if that happens in conjunction with a moratorium, that's going to be devastating to the industry in ways that I think even people who are nervous about the effect of data centers, don't foresee.
There's an interesting convergence of phenomena here. In one sense, it's kind of like we saw these attitudes about big box stores and SUVs, right? There's just like big things that eat up energy, or just sort of, capitalist behemoths, anywhere near you is a bad thing. There's also this sort of health panic. I don't know how, there's like, it reminds me of like cell phone towers. You don't want those near you. And so it's like, it's another one. It's kind of an omni-cause situation here. It's very easy to hate if you are of a certain inclination.
Hochul's reasoning when she announced this is so fatuous. It's worth examining for a moment. And we should also talk about the influence campaign. You know, it's true that Americans on their own have anxieties about AI, the four of us among them. But separate and apart from that, there is a massive Chinese, Iranian, Russian influence campaign to stoke and spread those fears among people to give China a leg up in this technology race that is under-examined. However, the New York Times did have an A1 story on this that people should be aware of. And Hochul's decision is helpful to the Chinese, who they don't have to deal with a democracy and public sentiment. They are just building, building, building. So she said, you know, we need to have this moratorium because data centers, they occupy a lot of land. They displace agricultural space and open spaces. And if you live near one, they emit vibrations and noise. And it brought me back to, I lived on 92nd Street and 2nd Avenue when they were building out the 2nd Avenue subway line in New York. If you want to talk about vibrations and noise, okay, there would be no subway in New York City. Let me tell you that. And our Ira Stoll in the Free Beacon makes this point in a piece about the data centers. And would cities even exist? You know, would suburbs exist if we were concerned about taking up open spaces and land? It is absurd. And on the data centers, these things are going to get built. They are going to get built. The question is whether they're going to be built in America with oversight from the U.S. government, or whether they are going to be built in different countries, particularly in China, with Chinese control over them. And we have very few Democrats, Democratic governors, Democratic lawmakers framing it in this way. Instead, we have socialist politicians in cahoots with Chinese-aligned billionaires like Neville Roy Singham, who has relocated to Shanghai and is working hand in glove with the CCP, having events with CCP-aligned scholars in this country. Bernie Sanders did an event with 2 China scholars stoking American fears about the expansion of AI. And it is a genuine scandal. A genuine scandal.
I just want to remind people, this is as a New York specific issue in regards to 21st century Luddism. In 2007, when the fracking industry suddenly matured, and suddenly they were discovering that you could harvest shale oil out of, you could harvest natural gas out of shale. And Pennsylvania went all in. And there was a gigantic multi-state field called the Marcellus Shale. And was like hitting, it was like hitting oil in Texas in the early 20th century. New York State, because of environmental pressure, and the idea was, if we start harvesting it, the oil is going to get into the aquifer, and it's going to poison our drinking water, all of which was technologically an absurdity. It was nowhere near the aquifer. It wasn't going to work that way. It was like a kind of weirdly illiterate threat. New York State put a moratorium on, or a ban on, fracking. So, because of the way the Marcellus Shale is built, you see, Pennsylvania was able to, in the words of Daniel Plainview in the movie There Will Be Blood, in the notorious line spoken by Daniel Day-Lewis in his Oscar-winning performance, Pennsylvania drank New York's milkshake. His straw went across state lines into New York, and Pennsylvania sucked all of the natural gas out of the Marcellus Shale on the New York side and profited enormously from it. So The oil came out, it was harvested, it was taken, but New York did not get the benefit of any of it because it had unilaterally decided to ban fracking out of a misguided and psychotic idea that fracking, which is the cleanest form of oil, by the way, right? It's natural gas burns much more cleanly than petroleum. That this was, that they were helping the environment. And here we are, and it's 20 years later almost, and New York State is about to do this again. It is turning its back on an energy producing industry, or an industry that needs energy generation. So it will produce energy generators in order to sustain itself, and it would do it in New York. So there would be AI business in New York. But if New York's not going to let it happen, it won't just go to China. I mean, it'll go to a rational state that wants to be the next Silicon Valley boomtown, because it'll have the data centers necessary to support AI facilities. And once again, blue states are like contributing to their own economic obsolescence in a really radical way based on foolish political ideas generated by people who do not have the economic interests of the people of the state foremost in their minds.
It's by the DSA and the China-aligned political parties that are attaching themselves to the DSA.
Well, and it's like the Amazon, wanting to build in New York, and AOC running them out of town. There's a lot of things like this where that business is going to go somewhere. It's just looking for a home. It will find a home. And, what you do in the campaign against that particular business getting to build that particular building there is you whip up all sorts of nonsense against the company and the product and all that stuff itself. And you end up really sort of, poisoning the well against that whole industry, because you have to come up with a better excuse to ban them than, I don't like Amazon, I don't like big stores, I like the little guy, or whatever. That doesn't work for killing jobs. So you have to say, like, well, they hire mercenaries to murder people in the Philippines or something. You have to come up with some kind of crazy story, and that's going to happen with data centers. And it's easier to believe it, because I also, I see like those AI commercials, and I'm like, I don't know how this is moving kind of fast. Sometimes I feel like a bit of a Luddite myself, but what I'm saying is the American people are absolutely open to the argument against the product that the industry is trying to, that comes with these data centers now. And that is going to make it a lot easier to try to scare people with nonsense.
Okay, well, finally, since Eliana quoted that Hochul explanation that involved, like, there's a buzzing noise. Like, if you live near a data center, there's a buzzing noise. This is actually when an industry starts up and it, needs to slap things up fast in order to keep itself going. And it needs to do this stuff faster than it has, than it's not yet mature, but, it has to ramp up production, essentially, right? So it does whatever it can do as quickly as possible. Issues like the buzzing or the noise or something like that, that is what a proper interplay between our capitalist system and our regulatory representative democracy helps solve over time. So maybe the answer is that you bury the data centers, right? Or that, that they have to be sunk in the ground or something like that, instead of being built like essentially like storage warehouses that have servers in them, and so therefore they make a lot of noise. The noise problem can be solved. Those things, that's how, the environment improves as industries mature, and the things that are unpleasant about them are dealt with, because it's also in their interest to make it as pleasant as possible to work and to make the atmosphere pleasant as possible to work in and around and all of that. If you stop it in its tracks, then you participate in no effort to create this interplay and where you can actually have a say as a our representatives can have a say in how this goes to make life as positive as possible for everybody. And instead, they just leave the field and say, you can't do this here. And fine, so it'll be done in Idaho. And then Idaho will be really rich, and New York State will end up, as I say, continuing to kind of collapse in this slow, century-long economic collapse that it has been undergoing, only saved by sort of Wall Street transaction fees, keeping New York alive. It's just one state in which this is happening, but it's a very representative and interesting issue to watch. Okay, so we'll leave it there. We'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Eliana, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.